Evan Matthews had always been the epitome of perfection. At 30 years old, his life was a well-orchestrated symphony of success. His dark brown hair, perfectly combed, framed his strikingly handsome face. But it was his piercing blue eyes that truly captivated anyone who dared to meet his gaze. He was the kind of man who could walk into a room and command attention, not by demanding it, but by simply existing. And yet, despite his wealth, his charm, and his good looks, Evan's life had never been entirely his own. For years, his family had been pushing him to marry a woman who could further solidify the family's legacy and business empire. His father, an influential business tycoon, had made it clear that Evan's success as the heir depended on his marriage. The woman would need to be of impeccable pedigree, a suitable match to seal a lucrative partnership with one of the most powerful companies in the world. Love, as his father often put it, had nothing to do with it. Evan hated every moment of it. He had always known that his family's idea of success was measured by money and power, not happiness or personal choice. But now, at the peak of his career, the pressure to marry was becoming unbearable. He had been avoiding the topic for months, but it was impossible to keep evading the inevitable. The business deal was on the line, and so Evan was given an ultimatum: find a suitable wife or risk losing everything he had worked so hard for. As fate would have it, the solution came when Evan met Abigail Rose. She was everything Evan hadn't expected. With long, wavy golden hair that shimmered under the soft light of the cafe, she had an allure that was impossible to ignore. Her radiant green eyes held a quiet intelligence, and her smile, though reserved, could light up the darkest corners of a room. She was a 25-year-old woman who had everything to offer but was slowly drowning in debt. Despite her charm and intelligence, Abigail's beauty had done little to protect her from financial ruin. Abigail's story was one of struggle. After years of working multiple jobs to support her mother, who was battling a terminal illness, she had been left with little to show for it. When her mother passed away, Abigail was left with a mountain of medical bills, unpaid loans, and an overwhelming sense of helplessness. Her dreams of starting her own business seemed impossible with her mounting debt. It was at one of these low points that Abigail crossed paths with Evan. He had been visiting a local cafe when he overheard her conversation with the barista about her financial struggles. What started as a simple exchange of pleasantries quickly turned into a deeper conversation. Abigail, unaware of Evan's wealth and status, had confessed her predicament to him, feeling a strange sense of comfort in his calm demeanor. Evan had listened, his gaze soft yet intense as she spoke. But in the back of his mind, a plan began to form. He had been searching for an answer to his family's pressure, and Abigail, with her quiet strength and undeniable beauty, seemed to fit the bill. The next day, Evan reached out to her, suggesting an unconventional proposal. It was a bold move, one that would change both of their lives forever. "Abigail," he had said, his voice smooth but with an edge of authority, "I need a wife, and I think you need a way out of your financial troubles. What if we entered a marriage of convenience? We can pretend to be married for a year. No strings attached, no feelings. Just a contract. You help me fulfill my family's wishes, and I'll help you with your financial issues." Abigail had been taken aback. At first, the idea seemed absurd. How could she marry a man she hardly knew, let alone for such a cold, transactional reason? But as she thought about it more, the desperation she had been feeling for months pushed her to consider it. She needed a way out. And while this marriage may be far from traditional, it seemed like the perfect solution. No emotions, no risks, just a way to escape her financial ruin. The arrangement was simple. She would live with him, attend events as his wife, and play the part for a year. After that, they would go their separate ways. No harm done. Evan, with his charm and wealth, could avoid his family's scrutiny, and Abigail could finally breathe a sigh of relief. There would be no pressure to fall in love. There was no room for love in this equation. The moment Abigail agreed, a strange weight seemed to lift off her shoulders. It wasn't ideal, but it was a chance to clear her debts, a chance to rebuild her life. And yet, even as she accepted, she couldn't help but wonder about the man she had agreed to marry. Would he be kind? Would he be someone she could respect, even in the confines of a contract? Evan, on the other hand, knew exactly what he was doing. He had been dreading the idea of marriage for business reasons. but this offer gave him a sense of control. There were no emotional strings to worry about, no risk of falling for someone who might not return his feelings. It would be easy, convenient, and in the end it would get his family off his back. But as the days went on and the wedding preparations began, a strange thing started to happen. Evan found himself thinking about Abigail more than he cared to admit. Her quiet strength, her intelligence, her grace, they were all things he admired from afar. But there was no room for these feelings in this marriage. After all, it was just an arrangement, a business deal. Still, he couldn't shake the way his heart seemed to race whenever she was near. And Abigail? Well, she hadn't quite figured out what was happening inside her own heart. She had promised herself she wouldn't let this marriage be anything more than a contract. But as the days wore on, she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward Evan. Neither of them knew it yet, but the arrangement they had made was about to unravel in ways they never expected. Emotions that neither had planned for were already beginning to stir. What began as a simple marriage of convenience was slowly becoming something far more complicated. Evan Matthews and Abigail Rose were, to the outside world, the picture-perfect couple. The tabloids couldn't get enough of them. At every gala, charity event, and social gathering, they were seen smiling and posing together, their chemistry undeniable. Evan's strong jawline and piercing blue eyes made him a desirable companion, and Abigail's stunning figure, graceful presence, and radiant beauty made them the epitome of a high society couple. On the surface, it seemed like a fairy tale. Behind closed doors, however, things couldn't have been more different. Their home was pristine, filled with luxurious furniture, expensive artwork, and the kind of decor that exuded wealth and sophistication. But the walls that surrounded them were cold, just like the space between them. They would sit across from each other at dinner, their conversation polite but strained, both carefully avoiding any mention of their personal lives. They were roommates, not spouses, strangers living under the same roof for the sake of convenience. Evan had always been used to the facade of a perfect life. He had grown up in a world where appearances were everything, and emotions were to be kept behind closed doors. His family had trained him well in the art of playing the part, of smiling through the pain, of never showing weakness. But Abigail, she was different. There was something about her that intrigued him, something beyond her beauty. He admired her strength, her independence, the way she seemed to carry the weight of the world with quiet dignity. Abigail, for her part, had entered the arrangement with one goal in mind: financial stability. She had no illusions about this marriage. It was a transaction, pure and simple. She knew that Evan had no interest in her beyond what she could provide in terms of a social facade. She had no intention of letting herself fall for him. She had been down that road before, falling for someone who wasn't willing to love her in return. She wouldn't let herself make that mistake again. And yet, each day that passed, she found herself noticing more and more about Evan. His confidence, his intelligence, the way his eyes lit up when he spoke about something he was passionate about. There was a depth to him that she hadn't expected, and it both fascinated and terrified her. The breaking point came one evening, at a lavish gala held in honor of one of Evan's business partners. The ballroom was bathed in golden light, the sound of a live orchestra filling the air. A sea of people in designer gowns and tuxedos mingled, champagne glasses clinking as laughter echoed through the grand hall. To anyone watching, Evan and Abigail were the perfect couple. They danced together, their steps synchronized as if they had been doing this for years, a graceful duet of elegance and poise. As they swirled around the dance floor, Abigail felt a strange flutter in her chest. It was the first time in weeks that she had allowed herself to be swept up in the music, to feel the warmth of Evan's touch on her back, guiding her with ease. He was a good dancer, confident, steady, but there was something more in the way he held her. His hand rested lightly on her waist, and when she glanced up at him, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes. For a moment, she forgot they were pretending. She forgot about the contract they had signed, about the year that loomed ahead of them. She felt real, like they were a couple, a true couple, dancing under the stars. But then just as quickly, reality set in. She pulled herself back, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "This is nice," she said, her voice quieter than usual, but she couldn't help the tremor of vulnerability that seeped into her tone. Evan, sensing the shift in her energy, looked down at her. There was a moment of silence between them, where neither of them knew quite what to say. They weren't supposed to be talking about anything personal. This was just a dance, nothing more. "It is," Evan replied, his voice low and surprisingly tender. His gaze lingered on her for a moment, and Abigail felt something stir deep inside her. She fought it, pushing the feeling away. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. She wasn't supposed to feel this way about him. As the music continued, they fell back into their routine. The dance was beautiful, but the words between them remained distant, just as they always had been. When the song ended, they applauded politely along with the rest of the crowd, as if the moment they had shared on the dance floor had been nothing more than a fleeting illusion. But as the night went on, something shifted. The warmth that had flared between them lingered, hanging in the air like a secret neither of them dared to acknowledge. Over the course of the evening, Evan found himself unable to look away from Abigail. She had always been beautiful, of course, but tonight, something about her, her grace, her laughter, the way she seemed so effortlessly poised, captivated him in a way he hadn't anticipated. He had always admired her strength, but tonight he found himself drawn to the quiet vulnerability she tried so hard to hide. They returned home that evening, neither speaking much, as usual. But something had changed. The silence between them wasn't as heavy, wasn't as uncomfortable. It was as if, for the first time, they had seen each other in a new light, and yet both were determined to keep their distance, both refusing to acknowledge what was brewing beneath the surface. In the days that followed, their interactions began to shift ever so slightly. Their conversations, once strictly about business and the logistics of their marriage, began to touch on more personal topics. Evan would ask about her day, about her goals, about the things she wanted in life, questions he hadn't thought to ask before. Abigail, for her part, found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected. There was a depth to Evan that she hadn't seen before, a vulnerability that made her question everything she thought she knew about him. But despite these small moments of connection, neither of them was ready to admit the truth. They both had too much at stake, too much to lose. This was supposed to be a marriage of convenience, nothing more. But deep down, both of them were beginning to realize that pretending to be married was no longer as simple as it seemed. The weeks that followed their dance at the gala felt like a slow, unspoken unraveling. Despite the agreement they had made, despite the barriers they tried so hard to keep in place, Evan Matthews and Abigail Rose were changing, and neither of them quite knew how it had happened. It started subtly at first, small, fleeting moments that neither of them acknowledged aloud, but both felt deeply. At events, in their shared home, even in the quiet moments where they sat together in the living room, their proximity no longer felt as hollow. The distance they once maintained seemed to shrink, just slightly, like an invisible thread pulling them closer, inch by inch. Abigail noticed it first, how his presence had begun to feel comforting, almost necessary. The sharpness in his eyes, once a cold blue that had made him appear unapproachable, now seemed softer, warmer, at least when he looked at her. He no longer just glanced over her, sizing her up as a business partner. He watched her, really watched her, as though seeing her for the first time. It happened one afternoon when they decided to take a weekend getaway to a private estate Evan owned on the outskirts of the city. The estate was sprawling, a perfect escape from the prying eyes of the public and the weight of their shared, faceless contract. It was just the two of them, alone in a quiet house with nothing to do but relax. Or at least that was the plan. The sun was beginning to dip behind the horizon, casting hues of orange and purple across the sky. Abigail stood by the window, her gaze lost in the beauty of the sunset. The view was breathtaking, something Evan had often taken for granted. He'd seen sunsets like this 1,000 times, but tonight, there was something different about it, something more intimate about the way Abigail stood there, her eyes soft, her shoulders slightly hunched as though she were carrying the weight of unspoken thoughts. Evan found himself watching her, unsure of what compelled him to do so. There was something about her, something in the way she seemed to withdraw into herself, as if she were guarding some deep, hidden part of her. The cool air from the open window whispered through the room, but the silence between them felt thick, laden with thoughts they both refused to voice. He cleared his throat, breaking the tension. Beautiful, isn't it? Abigail didn't immediately respond. She simply nodded, her eyes still locked on the fading light. It is, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I always used to think that maybe someday I'd find a place like this, a place where I could feel at peace. Evan frowned, his curiosity piqued. At peace? He wasn't used to hearing Abigail speak like this, so vulnerable, so open. He had never seen this side of her before. Abigail turned to face him then, her lips curling into a faint smile. It's silly, I know, but sometimes I think that if I had the right space, the right life, maybe I could stop running away from myself. Evan blinked, taken aback by the depth of her words. There was something in her eyes, a sadness, a longing, that he couldn't quite place. He took a step closer, suddenly unsure of how to respond, but also unable to look away from her. For the first time, he felt as though he were seeing Abigail not just as his wife or the woman he'd married for convenience, but as a real person, a woman with dreams, with fears, with a past he knew so little about. Before he could formulate a response, Abigail shifted uncomfortably. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to sound like that. It's just, sometimes I get these feelings. She smiled again, but this time it was weaker, more uncertain. Anyway, let's not ruin the view with my rambling. But Evan couldn't let it go. You're not rambling, he said, his voice softer than usual. I get it. Sometimes I think we all just need to be somewhere we can breathe, without the weight of the world on our shoulders. For a moment, there was nothing but the distant sound of the wind rustling the trees outside. Their eyes locked for a heartbeat, something shifting between them. And then, as quickly as it had come, the moment passed. Later that evening, as the two of them sat by the fireplace, sipping wine and laughing lightly at old stories from their separate lives, the atmosphere between them had changed. The playful banter they'd gotten so used to had softened, replaced by something more intimate, more fragile. Do you ever wonder, Abigail asked, her voice low and tinged with uncertainty, what would have happened if we didn't have this contract, if we didn't pretend for a year? Evan's chest tightened, and for a brief moment, he didn't answer. He studied the fire flickering in front of them, the flames dancing in the quiet room. His mind raced, his emotions tangled. What would have happened? Would they have ever crossed paths outside of this arrangement? Would he have noticed her at all? I don't know, he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. I think we wouldn't have gotten to know each other this way. Abigail looked down at her glass, swirling the wine absently. You're probably right. It's just, I never thought this would happen, that I would start to care about you, even though it's just supposed to be a contract. The words hung in the air, heavy and unspoken. It was clear that they were both starting to question what this arrangement really meant. The line between pretending and real feelings was beginning to blur. Evan opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, Abigail stood abruptly, her heart racing. She could feel the pull toward him, the magnetic force that seemed to draw her closer with every passing moment. Her breath hitched as she realized just how close she was to crossing a line that she couldn't uncross, the line between pretending and real emotion. I think I need some air, she said hurriedly, her voice shaky. She turned and hurried to the guest room, leaving Evan alone by the fire, his mind spinning. The rest of the night was a blur. Abigail lay awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts a whirlwind. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest. It wasn't supposed to be like this. This was just a contract. She wasn't supposed to fall for him. But Evan too lay awake, staring at the ceiling in his own room. He could feel the weight of the unspoken words between them. The attraction he felt for her was undeniable, and for the first time, he wasn't sure if he could keep pretending it was just business anymore. They were both caught in the quiet tension of their growing desires, neither knowing how to bridge the gap between what was real and what was merely a role they had been playing. The charity gala glittered with diamonds and designer gowns, but Evan Matthews couldn't care less. His gaze was fixed, unblinking, on one woman across the ballroom. Abigail. She stood under the chandelier, laughing at something another man said. Her hand touched the man's arm lightly, her smile radiant. Evan's fingers curled around the glass in his hand, his blue eyes darkening. Something ugly and unfamiliar was rising in his chest. Jealousy. He wasn't supposed to feel this way. This was all pretend. A contract. A facade. And yet, it stung. Hours later, back in their hotel suite, silence stretched between them like glass. Evan paced once, then twice, unable to hold back. "You seem to enjoy his company," he said sharply. Abigail blinked, confused. "What?" "That guy at the gala. You were pretty cozy with him," he bit out. She frowned. "It was just small talk, Evan. Are you actually jealous?" He scoffed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Why does it bother me so much that you're talking to him?" "Evan," she said softly, "we're not really married. We're just playing a part. Remember?" Her words were gentle, but they felt like a slap. "That's the problem," he muttered, stepping closer. "I can't keep pretending." Her breath caught in her throat. "I think I've fallen in love with you," Evan confessed, his voice low and raw. The room fell into silence. Abigail's heart pounded so loudly she thought he might hear it. "You—" "What?" she whispered. "I know this wasn't part of the plan, but I can't deny it anymore. I feel something real, Abigail, and it's terrifying." She looked at him, eyes wide, lips parted, but no words came. "I know you didn't sign up for this," he continued, "but tell me the truth. Hasn't any of this felt real to you too?" Abigail swallowed hard, her voice trembling. I I don't know what to say." He nodded, stepping back slightly, giving her space. "You don't have to say anything now. I just needed you to know." She turned away, staring out the window at the city lights, her emotions a tangled storm inside her. Part of her wanted to run. This wasn't supposed to happen. But the other part, the part that secretly hoped for this moment, it was terrified too. Behind them, the silence settled once again. But it carried a new weight. Something had changed, and there was no turning back. The morning after Evan's confession, silence hovered like a thick fog between them. They went through the motions, coffee, small talk, scheduled appearances, but everything had changed. Abigail couldn't shake the echo of Evan's whispered words. "I think I've fallen in love with you." It replayed in her mind like a haunting melody. Evan, too, was restless. His usual composure was now cracked, and every glance at Abigail pulled him deeper into emotions he'd once sworn never to feel again. He didn't try to take back what he said. Instead, he let his actions speak louder. He brought her favorite pastries without a word. He helped her with the errands she usually tackled alone. He laughed at her jokes with a warmth that wasn't fake anymore. Abigail found herself leaning in. She smiled more easily around him. She caught herself reaching for his hand when no one was watching. Their dinners turned softer, their silences more comfortable. It was no longer just pretending. Something real was blooming, and it terrified her. But just as the walls between them began to fall, her past came knocking again. A dreaded phone call shattered the fragile peace. Her bank had rejected her latest loan appeal, and the collection agency was threatening legal action. Abigail stared at the numbers on the screen. Impossible to pay. A mountain of debt waiting to crush her. Panic crept into her chest. She couldn't drag Evan into this. He had given her kindness, comfort, and something dangerously close to love. She couldn't repay that by burdening him with her mess. She had to walk away before he found out the truth. She wrote a simple note, no goodbye, no explanation, just a thank you for everything. Then she left the estate quietly, heart splintering with every step. That night at a charity gala, Evan searched for her in vain. Her absence gnawed at him. Something wasn't right. She wouldn't just disappear. When the event ended, he checked her apartment. Empty, her phone off. His chest tightened as suspicion surged through him. Then he saw her near the train station, wearing a coat too thin for the cold and clutching a small suitcase. He followed her in silence, watching her sit alone on a bench, head bowed. Then he stepped into the light. "Running away!" His voice was quiet but edged with hurt. She jumped, eyes wide. "Evan, how did you—" "Why are you leaving me, Abigail?" he asked, stepping closer. "After everything, you still think I wouldn't want to know the truth?" She lowered her gaze, shame coloring her cheeks. "I didn't want you to feel responsible for me. My debts, they're worse than I told you. I didn't want to drag you down. Evan exhaled sharply, the pieces finally clicking together. You think I care about the money? I care, she whispered, eyes glistening, because I love you too, and that's why I had to go. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Evan reached out, gently lifting her chin. You don't get to make that choice alone, he said. Not when it comes to us. And for the first time, it wasn't a game. It wasn't an arrangement. It was real. The days that followed were a delicate dance. Abigail returned with Evan that night, unsure of her place but too emotionally spent to resist his quiet insistence that she stay. He didn't press her for more confessions, didn't bombard her with questions. Instead, he offered her space, but not distance. Evan, on the other hand, made his decision in silence. He met with his lawyers. He tracked down every creditor, every hidden clause buried in the web of Abigail's debts. It took weeks, but he untangled it all. Every cent paid, every record cleared. But he told no one, especially not Abigail. Not yet. He wanted her to see something first. Not his wealth, not his influence, but his heart. He watched her closely in those quiet moments. When she thought he wasn't looking, she still winced at every unexpected phone call. She flinched at envelopes in the mailbox. And at night, she curled up too tightly, like someone bracing for a blow that never came. It broke him, so he made a plan. Their one-year anniversary approached, a date they had initially marked for appearances. But now it meant something else entirely to him, a symbol of how far they'd come, how far he had fallen for her. He transformed their home that evening. No cameras, no staff, just soft music, candlelight, and the faint scent of lavender she always loved. When Abigail walked through the door, she froze, stunned by the soft golden glow spilling through the living room and the man waiting for her at its center, holding 2 glasses of wine and a nervous smile. Evan, she breathed. He stepped forward, setting the glasses aside. Then, without a word, he pulled her gently into his arms. I've been a fool, Abigail, he murmured, voice rough with emotion. I let fear dictate my heart. I let pride keep me silent, and it nearly cost me the only real thing I've ever had. She pulled back slightly, searching his eyes. Her heart pounded. What are you saying? He took her hand, pressed it to his chest, where his heart thundered. I'm saying I love you. I'm in love with you, Abigail Rose. This wasn't an act, not for a long time. The room fell silent except for the music. Abigail's breath caught in her throat. The walls she had so carefully built around herself, around her heart, began to crumble, piece by aching piece. You love me? She whispered, voice shaking. He nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. With everything I am. A tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. She stepped closer, wrapping her arms around him, holding him like she never wanted to let go. Because this time she didn't. The silence that followed Evan's confession was not empty. It was full. Full of emotion, of everything they had tried to bury under contracts, fear, and pretenses. Abigail looked up at him, tears shimmering in her eyes, not from sadness, but from relief. I love you too, Evan, she whispered. I think I've loved you for a long time. I just didn't want to believe it. His breath caught. Hearing those words, genuine, unforced, struck something deep inside him. He pulled her closer, holding her like she was the only anchor he had in the world. That night, for the first time, they didn't sleep in separate rooms or separate hearts. They lay together not as strangers in an arrangement, but as 2 souls finally colliding in the honesty they had denied themselves for too long. In the days that followed, everything shifted. Their home, once quiet and cold, was now alive with laughter and warmth. Abigail began waking up before Evan just to watch him sleep, marveling at how peaceful he looked. And Evan found himself smiling more, calling off unnecessary meetings just to spend another hour at breakfast with her. They started making plans, real ones. Vacations, not for show, but for exploration. Joint decisions about the charities they'd support. Even talks about buying a countryside home, away from the spotlight, just for themselves. Abigail, now free from the crushing weight of debt and lies, flourished. She returned to painting, something she had long abandoned in survival mode. Evan supported her without question, turning one of the guest rooms into a sunlit studio before she could even ask. For the first time, They were truly building a life, one that wasn't rooted in contracts or convenience, but in love. They told close friends and family the truth together. Some were shocked, others skeptical, but none of it mattered. They had each other. That was enough. On a quiet evening, a few weeks later, they stood hand in hand on the balcony of their city apartment. Below them, the skyline glittered like stars scattered across the earth. Evan turned to her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You changed everything, Abigail," he murmured, "and I don't ever want to go back to who I was before you." Her heart swelled and she squeezed his hand tighter. "Then don't," she whispered. "Let's keep moving forward. Together." He leaned down, his forehead resting gently against hers. "I love you, Abigail, and I'll never let you go." And this time she didn't whisper back. She kissed him, because some promises don't need words to be believed.